Hello everyone, thanks for your watching. Jack had run out of patience long before he ran out of love for Billy. In recent days, Genoa City itself felt like a wire pulled to tight, every alliance strained, every secret waiting to snap, every power play simmering beneath a surface that pretended to be calm. But what truly chilled Jack wasn't the outside threats. It was the danger growing inside his own family. Inside the very walls that were supposed to represent stability and legacy. Billy's silence, his guarded movements, the private meetings he refused to explain, and the way his eyes flared with something feverish whenever the name Newman came up. It all formed a pattern Jack couldn't ignore anymore. Jack knew better than anyone that it only took one Abbott losing control to pull the entire family down with him. And Billy was standing at the edge, acting closer than he'd ever admit, and more determined than Jack had ever seen. Jack didn't choose Abbott for this confrontation. A company boardroom was its own battlefield. And even a single sharp sentence could be turned into a rumor, a headline, a weapon for the wrong hands. So he summoned Billy to the Abbott mansion instead, where tradition hung in the air like a silent witness, where every corner spoke of the values their father fought to build. But tonight, there was no warmth in that house. It felt like a courtroom without a judge, Jack taking the role of protector, guardian of the Abbott name, while Billy walked in like a man already convinced he was on trial for a crime he considered righteous. Jack demanded privacy. He demanded seriousness. No detours, no excuses, no charming deflections. He didn't need Billy's reassurances that everything was handled. Jack had heard that line too many times, and every time it was spoken, the Abbott family paid for it with reputation, money, and fractured trust that never fully healed. When Billy arrived, he brought that familiar defiance with him, kind of posture that said he'd expected this conversation and had already built armor for it. But Jack refused to let Billy steer the discussion into vague territory. He went straight for the truth Jack could no longer swallow. Billy's obsession with revenge against the Newmans. Jack looked at him like he was watching someone set fire to his own house, just to make sure the neighbor smelled smoke. He made it clear that Billy's moves, no matter how he dressed them up as strategy or justice, were dragging Abbott communications, dragging Abbott, dragging the entire Abbott legacy into a dangerous, humiliating spiral. The most frightening part wasn't that Billy wanted to win. It was that Billy wanted to punish. And once punishment becomes the goal, morals blur, boundaries disappear, and consequences become acceptable casualties. Jack reminded Billy that the Abbott legacy wasn't a toy to be thrown into the ring as bait for a personal war. Abbott wasn't a stage for Billy to prove he could take down Newman at any cost. Abbott Communications wasn't a shield to hide behind when the rubble finally fell. Jack's voice stayed controlled, but every word landed heavy, measured, deliberate. Sharpened by years of disappointment he tried not to hold against his brother. Underneath that restraint was real fear. Fear that Billy would repeat history. Fear that the Abbott name would once again be forced to bow under scandal and chaos. Fear that Jack himself would once again be the one left sweeping up the mess. While Billy insisted the wreckage was worth it, Jack didn't bring up the past to humiliate Billy, brought it up to drag him back to reality. Billy's worst mistakes always began the same way, absolute confidence that he was right, that revenge was justified, that he could control the game. And every time, the outcome was predictable. The Abbott name took the hit. Relationships cracked. Trust bled out slowly until it became something no one could fully restore. Jack didn't have to recite every detail because Billy already knew. Billy had always known. And that was the most bitter part. Billy knew the cost, yet he kept charging forward anyway. As if the emptiness inside him required a war to fill it. As if he needed a Newman to blame so he wouldn't have to look too closely at his own bruises and insecurities. Billy tried to justify everything. He insisted the Newmans deserved payback, that what they'd done to him, to the Abbotts, to Abbott couldn't just be forgiven or forgotten. He spoke like a man staring into a mirror and convincing himself he was the only one brave enough to do what had to be done. He turned his rage into a mission, his pain into a cause. And in that moment, Jack saw the real danger. Billy wasn't just chasing revenge. Billy believed revenge was the only thing that made him feel powerful. The only thing that made him feel like he mattered. That was exactly why Jack had to be ruthless. He gave Billy an ultimatum, not advice, not a soft warning, but a line carved into stone. Stop this now, or lose Jack's financial support. Jack hated saying it. It tasted like betrayal in his mouth. But he hated the alternative even more, watching the entire Abbott empire burn down. Because Billy couldn't let go of a grudge. And Jack didn't stop there. He warned Billy that if he kept walking this self-destructive path, Jack would take away his power, strip him of leadership, strip him of the authority he kept using as a weapon. Billy would not get to gamble with Abbott resources just to satisfy his hunger for vengeance. Jack didn't deliver the threat with dramatic flair. He said it with a low, steady weight that felt final. The voice of a man who had seen too many disasters to still believe the promise. "I've got it under control." Billy reacted the way Jack expected: idiot resistance, pride flaring, anger tightening his shoulders like chains. He couldn't stand being cornered. Couldn't stand the reminder that he was still viewed as the problem brother. Still the one who needed supervision and limits. He hated the way Jack could use money and power like a leash. Billy snapped like an animal pushed into a corner, bold, reckless, desperate to prove he didn't need anyone. But even as he forced himself to look unshaken, something flickered in his eyes. A fracture. A hesitation so small Billy might not have noticed it himself. Because Jack's words had struck the truth Billy refused to admit. He was running out of ground to stand on, and this time, the fall wouldn't just be his alone. The confrontation ended without comfort, without reconciliation, without a moment of softness. No embrace. No relief. Only air thick with tension, as if the Abbott mansion itself had absorbed the shockwave. Jack remained behind, outwardly calm, but internally torn apart, knowing he had done what was necessary, while also feeling like he'd pushed Billy even farther away. And Billy walked out fueled by fury, but haunted by that ultimatum. Because it didn't come from an enemy. It came from the brother who had saved him more times than Billy deserved. And when the door finally closed, the silence inside the Abbott mansion wasn't peace. It was the kind of quiet that comes before a storm. Jack might have drawn a boundary, but he knew Billy wasn't the kind of man who stopped just because someone threatened him. Billy would find another angle, another path, another way to strike back, even if it meant burning bridges behind him. The terrifying question wasn't whether Billy would continue targeting Newman. It was what he was willing to sacrifice to win, and whether Jack would soon be forced to follow through, cut Billy off completely, strip him of control, and turn a family conflict into a war with no return point right as something new began to stir outside the Abbott walls. As if someone had overheard that ultimatum and was preparing the one move that could make everything explode. Jack wasn't the kind of man who enjoyed inserting himself into other people's relationships. And he certainly wasn't the kind who sought out Sally just to lecture her or impose his will on her choices. But lately, there had been too many warning signs for him to keep looking the other way. In Genoa City, cracks rarely announced themselves with noise. They spread quietly, like roots growing beneath a foundation, until one day the damage is impossible to deny. And Jack could see that damage forming inside Billy and Sally's relationship. It wasn't collapsing in a dramatic explosion. There was no sudden breakup, no obvious betrayal everyone could point to. It was breaking down in a slower, more painful way, through secrets, through lingering silences, through questions that never received a real answer. More and more, Jack had the unsettling sense that Billy was living outside of himself, driven by something he wouldn't name, pulled forward by a plan he refused to fully explain. And Sally, whether she realized it or not, was standing close enough to take the full impact when everything finally detonated. Jack happened to witness a fierce argument between Billy and Sally, and it immediately struck him that this wasn't just a normal disagreement between two people trying to work things out. This had teeth. This was the kind of clash that exposed how far apart they were becoming. One person desperate for the truth, the other determined to control the story. Sally was not a fragile woman, and she wasn't easily manipulated. But the anger in her eyes that day didn't come from Billy saying the wrong thing. It came from the deeper wound of realizing she was being kept out. She could feel it. Billy was hiding something. And what felt cruel wasn't only the secret itself, but the way Billy kept acting like nothing was wrong, like her instincts were inconvenient, like her need for clarity was an overreaction. Jack recognized something in Sally's expression that made his stomach tighten, the look of a woman still trying to believe because she loves, still trying to be patient, still trying to trust even as that patience is being worn away piece by constant ambiguity. And in Billy, Jack saw what he had always feared most, a stubborn mix of pride and self-destruct. The same reckless hunger that had ruined Billy before, now resurfacing with a dangerous new intensity. After that moment, Jack knew he couldn't simply stand back. He wasn't approaching Sally as some powerful Abbott determined to control her life. He was approaching her as a brother who had watched Billy implode too many times, who had seen the wreckage Billy left behind, and who had been forced, again and again, to pull Billy out of the fire Billy himself started. But Jack also understood the cruel paradox: every time Billy was saved, Billy somehow took it as permission to gamble even harder the next time. And now, The person being dragged into that spiral wasn't only Jack's family or their business interests, or their reputation. It was Sally, a woman with ambition, intelligence, and pride, yet dangerously close to the blast radius Billy was creating. So Jack chose to speak with Sally privately. He watched his words carefully, refusing to threaten or judge. He reminded himself not to sound patronizing, because he knew Sally could interpret concern as disrespect. Jack admitted he had noticed the tension between her and Billy, and he refused to pretend he hadn't. But what mattered most to Jack wasn't romance, it was transparency. He told her bluntly that Billy's recent choices had become murky in a way that felt deeply wrong. It wasn't just that Billy was being difficult, it was that Billy was moving through shadows, making decisions he couldn't or wouldn't explain, and anyone standing beside him could be pulled into disaster without warning. Jack didn't call Billy evil. He didn't say Billy was beyond saving. He simply said the truth Sally needed to hear. Billy was in a dangerous state of mind, one where vengeance, ego, and obsession could easily erase every boundary that normally protects innocent people. Jack's warning wasn't delivered with cruelty, it carried the exhaustion of someone who had been forced to rebuild from Billy's wreckage too many times. If he was honest, Jack also carried something painfully human: disappointment. Disappointment that Billy was still circling the same destructive pattern, and that Jack already knew who would suffer most if it continued. It wouldn't be Billy. Billy always found a way to survive his own chaos. The ones who paid the highest price were the ones who believed in him. Jack wanted Sally to understand that before she was too deeply trapped. He hoped she could be a positive influence, or at the very least, that she could protect herself from the consequences Billy was about to unleash. Sally's first reaction was defensive, and Jack couldn't blame her. No one likes being warned as if they're naive. No one wants to feel as though their intelligence is being questioned. Sally's pride rose like a shield, her posture tightening as if she needed to defend her choices, her judgment, even her feelings. But Jack didn't back down, and he didn't attack. He stayed steady, patient, almost painfully careful. He told her he wasn't there to interfere, and he wasn't there to control anything. He was there because he couldn't lie to her, not after what he'd seen. Not after what he knew Billy was capable of when he refused to stop himself. And then Jack said the sentence that shifted the air between them. Billy could drag you down with him. That was the moment Sally went quiet, not because Jack had overpowered her, but because part of her had already known it. There are instincts we bury when we're in love, because admitting them would hurt too much. Sally finally confessed, reluctantly but honestly, that she felt blinded. Not because she was foolish, but because Billy was skilled at turning secrecy into something that sounded reasonable. Billy didn't lie loudly. He deflected. He softened the truth. He promised explanations later. And that later was the trap, because it made Sally doubt herself. It made her wonder if she was being impatient, if she was imagining problems, if her need for honesty was unfair. Jack could see that internal war in her eyes, and it felt like watching a woman balance on a rope that was slowly unraveling beneath her feet. Jack repeated the most important point: Sally needed to protect herself. Not by storming out and ending everything in one dramatic move, and not by turning love into war, but by recognizing the truth she was still resisting. Billy's impulsive behavior could destroy her if she didn't draw a boundary. Jack spoke about reputation, about career, about the future Sally had fought hard to build. And in that moment, it hit me how painfully real this storyline feels. Beyond the drama of the showcase, sometimes people love so deeply, they forget they deserve respect. Sally may still love Billy, but she cannot love him at the cost of losing herself. Not if she wants to survive what's coming. That conversation stayed with Sally, not as a passing thought, but as the slow arrival of clarity, kind that chills you, even as it steadies you. She began to realize Billy wasn't hiding something small. He was hiding something important, something tied to Newman, something tied to revenge, something he knew she would never approve of if she understood the full truth. And when Sally finally accepted that, she stopped being the woman waiting for reassurance. She became the woman preparing to make a decision. Sally decided she needed the truth, not to destroy Billy, but to understand whether she was loving a real man or only the version of Billy he wanted her to see. Part of her still wanted to help him, because love doesn't vanish instantly, even when trust is breaking. But now her willingness to help came with conditions. Billy had to be transparent. Billy had to stop pulling her into darkness and expecting her to stand there quietly. Sally understood that if she kept closing her eyes, she wouldn't only be hurt emotionally, she could end up tangled in legal trouble, business disaster, and public humiliation. Waking up one day to realize she had traded her entire future for a man chasing war. And so Sally confronted Billy. No detours, no gentle hints. She demanded clear answers about his recent mysterious behavior, the decisions he was making behind her back, The things that made her feel like an outsider in her own relationship. That confrontation sparked immediate tension. Because Billy reacted exactly as Jack feared he would be dodging. He didn't fully deny anything, but he didn't admit the truth either. He tried to minimize it, to soften it, to make Sally feel as though she was overreacting. But this time, Sally wasn't willing to be calmed with half-truths. The more Billy avoided her questions, the more she knew her instincts were right. And her anger stopped being simple jealousy or emotional pain. It became the sharp, protective awareness of a woman refusing to be used. Sally began drawing Linus quietly, firmly, like a door locking itself without a single dramatic slam. She didn't declare the relationship over and she didn't explode into reckless decisions. But her entire energy shifted. She refused to let Billy control the narrative anymore. She refused to keep telling herself, he'll explain eventually. She decided that if Billy couldn't be honest with her, she would not stand beside him blindly. And that realization hurt. Because sometimes boundaries aren't proof that love is they're proof that someone finally chose to love themselves before it was too late. The most frightening part is that Billy still didn't seem to understand what he was losing. He still believed he could stall, deflect, and keep Sally close through emotion alone. But Sally had started to wake up, and once Sally wakes up, she doesn't fall back asleep easily. Jack's warning might have sounded like a simple conversation, but it was more like a stone thrown into still water, sending ripples that Billy couldn't predict. Because the moment Sally decided to uncover the truth, the real question stopped being what Billy was hiding and became how long it would take before Sally discovered it and what would happen when she did. Especially if she finds out at the exact moment. Billy is stepping into the most dangerous game of his life. On our TV Spoilers channel, I'm always looking for content inspiration for each video by compiling short video clips to analyze and offer my personal opinions. This channel specializes in analyzing, theorizing, and discussing plot points in the Young and the Restless series from the perspective of a longtime fan. Through this, viewers can gain deeper, more objective, and more interesting insights. Subscribe to the channel to stay updated on the latest news about the Young and the Restless series.